The Battle of Marston Moor was fought on 2 July 1644, during the First English Civil War of 1642 to 1646. The combined forces of the English parliamentarians under Lord Fairfax and the Earl of Manchester and the Scottish Covenanters under the Earl of Leven defeated the Royalists commanded by Prince Rupert of the Rhine and the Marquis of Newcastle. During the summer of 1644, the Covenanters and Parliamentarians had been besieging York, which was defended by the Marquis of Newcastle. Rupert had gathered an army which marched through the northwest of England, gathering reinforcements and fresh recruits on the way, and across the Pennines to relieve the city. The convergence of these forces made the ensuing battle the largest of the civil wars. On 1 July, Rupert outmaneuvered the Covenanters and Parliamentarians to relieve the city. The next day, he sought battle with them even though he was outnumbered. He was dissuaded from attacking immediately, and during the day both sides gathered their full strength on Marston Moor, an expanse of wild meadow west of York. Towards evening, the Covenanters and Parliamentarians themselves launched a surprise attack. After a confused fight lasting 2 hours, Parliamentarian cavalry under Oliver Cromwell routed the Royalist cavalry from the field and, with Leven's infantry, annihilated the remaining Royalist infantry. After their defeat, the Royalists effectively abandoned northern England, losing much of the manpower from the northern counties of England and also losing access to the European continent through the ports on the North Sea coast. Although they partially retrieved their fortunes with victories later in the year in southern England, the loss of the North was to prove a fatal handicap the next year, when they tried unsuccessfully to link up with the Scottish Royalists under the Marquis of Montrose. Background: the Civil War in the North. In northern England, the Royalists had the advantage in numbers and local support, except in parts of Lancashire and the West Riding of Yorkshire, where the Parliamentarians had support from the clothing manufacturing towns which naturally maligned the gentry. On 30 June 1643, the Royalists commanded by the Marquis of Newcastle defeated the Parliamentarian army of Lord Fairfax at the Battle of Marston Moor near Bradford. Fairfax and his son, Sir Thomas Fairfax, fled with their remaining forces to the port of Hull, which was held for Parliament. Newcastle sent some of his army south into Lincolnshire, as part of a planned, three-pronged advance on London, but was forced to besiege Hull with most of his forces. The siege failed, as the Parliamentarian navy could supply and reinforce the port, and the garrison flooded wide areas around the city, while the Royalist detachments sent into Lincolnshire were defeated at the Battle of Gainsborough and the Battle of Winceby. In late 1643, the English Civil War widened. King Charles I negotiated a cessation in Ireland, which allowed him to reinforce his armies with English regiments which had been sent to Ireland following the Irish Rebellion of 1641. But Parliament took an even greater step by signing the Solemn League and Covenant, sealing an alliance with the Scottish Covenanters. Early in 1644, a Covenanter army under the Earl of Leven entered the north of England on behalf of the English Parliament. The Marquis of Newcastle was forced to divide his army, leaving a detachment under Sir John Bellasyse to watch the Parliamentarians under Lord Fairfax in Hull, while he led his main body north to confront Leven. Siege of York. During March and early April, the Marquis of Newcastle fought several delaying actions as he tried to prevent the Scots from crossing the River Tyne and surrounding the city of Newcastle upon Tyne. Meanwhile, a Parliamentarian cavalry force under Sir Thomas Fairfax, who had been campaigning in Cheshire and Lancashire during the winter, crossed the Pennines and entered the West Riding of Yorkshire. To prevent Sir Thomas rejoining Lord Fairfax in Hull, Bellasyse occupied the town of Selby, which lay between them. On the 11th of April, Sir Thomas Fairfax's force, reinforced by infantry under Sir John Meldrum, stormed Selby, capturing Bellasyse and most of his force. Hearing the news, Newcastle realized that the city of York was in danger. York was the principal city and bastion of royalist power in the north of England, and its loss would be a serious blow to the royalist cause. He hastily retreated there to forestall the Fairfaxes. Leven left a detachment to mask the royalist garrison of Newcastle upon Tyne, and followed Newcastle's army with his main body. On the 22nd of April, Leven and the Fairfaxes joined forces at Wetherby, about 14 miles west of York. Together, they began the siege of York. Initially, the siege was a rather loose blockade as the Covenanters and Parliamentarians concentrated on capturing smaller royalist garrisons which threatened their communications with Hull. On the 3rd of June, they were reinforced by the Parliamentarian Army of the Eastern Association under the Earl of Manchester. York was now completely encircled and siege operations began in earnest. Leven was accepted as commander-in-chief of the three combined Allied armies before York. It was politic to make the Scottish Covenanters preeminent in the north as they were the largest single contingent in the army. But Leven was also a respected veteran of the 30 Years' War. Relief moves. News of the siege soon reached Oxford, where King Charles had his wartime capital. From the 24th of April to the 5th of May, he held a council of war attended by his nephew and most renowned field commander, Prince Rupert. It was settled that while Charles attempted to play for time in Oxford, Rupert would relieve York. Rupert set out from Shrewsbury with a small force on the 16th of May. His first moves were intended to gather reinforcements along the way to bolster his army, and secure Lancashire for the troops heading over from Ireland for the royalist cause. He assumed the direction of a small royalist army, based on Chester and commanded by Lord John Byron, raising his force to 2,000 horse and 6,000 foot. Having forced a crossing of the River Mersey at Stockport, he stormed Bolton, allegedly killing 1,600 of the Parliamentarian defenders and citizens. Resting at Bury nearby, Rupert was joined by the Marquess of Newcastle's cavalry under Lord George Goring, which had broken out of York early in the siege, with a small contingent from Derbyshire, and several regiments which were being freshly raised in Lancashire by the Earl of Derby. Bypassing the Parliamentarian stronghold of Manchester, Rupert approached Liverpool on the 6th of June and wrested control of the city from Parliament after a 5-day siege. Rupert now hesitated, unsure whether to proceed to the relief of York or remain to consolidate the royalist hold on Lancashire, securing more reinforcements in the process. He also distrusted some of the members of Charles's Council of War and was wary of being so far from the king's side. On the 16th of June, he received a dispatch from the king which contained troubling news. The king's advisers on the Council of War had overturned Rupert's defensive policies, sending the garrisons of Reading and Abingdon on an offensive in the West Country. This had left Oxford exposed to a sudden threat from the Parliamentarian armies commanded by the Earl of Essex and Sir William Waller, and forced the king to leave the city in haste and head to Worcester, where he was still in danger. Together with this news, the letter contained some ambiguous orders regarding Rupert's northern offensive and future plans. But now I must give the true state of my affairs, which, if the condition be such as enforces me to give you more peremptory commands than I would willingly do, you must not take it ill. If York be lost, I shall esteem my crown little less, unless supported by your sudden march to me, and a miraculous conquest in the south, before the effects of the northern power can be found here. But if York be relieved, and you beat the rebels' army of both kingdoms, which are before it, then I may possibly make a shift upon the defensive to spin out time until you come to assist me. Wherefore I command and conjure you, by the duty and affection that I know you bear me, that all new enterprises laid aside, you immediately march according to your first intention, with all your force to the relief of York. But if that be either lost, or have freed themselves from the besiegers, or that for want of powder you cannot undertake that work, that you immediately march with your whole strength directly to Worcester to assist me in my army, without which or you having relieved York by beating the Scots, all the successes you can afterwards have must infallibly be useless unto me. Rupert understood the letter to be an order both to relieve York and defeat the allied army before heading south once more to aid the king. By this time Rupert's army numbered nearly 14,000. He set out from Liverpool to Preston, which surrendered without a fight. From there he proceeded via Clitheroe and crossed the Pennines to Skipton, where he paused for 3 days from the 26th of June to the 28th of June to fix arms, and await some final reinforcements from Cumberland and Westmoreland. He arrived at the Royalist garrison at Knaresborough Castle 14 miles northwest of York on the 30th of June. Relief of York. The Allies were aware of Rupert's approach and had been hoping that reinforcements from the Midlands under Sir John Meldrum and the Earl of Denbigh could ward off this threat, but they learned that these forces could not intervene in time. The Allied armies around York were separated from each other by rivers, and if Rupert attacked them in their siege lines he could destroy any one army before the other two could come to its aid. Therefore they abandoned the siege on the night of the 30th of June, and concentrated their forces near the village of Hesse before taking position on Marston Moor, where they blocked Rupert's expected direct march to York, and could easily move to their left to prevent Rupert making any move to the south via Wetherby. Early on the 1st of July, some Royalist cavalry advanced from Knaresborough and appeared on the moor, and the Allies prepared for battle. However, Rupert had made a 22-mile flank march to the northeast with his main body, crossing the River Ure at Boroughbridge and the River Swale at Thornton Bridge. These two rivers merged to form the River Ouse, which Rupert had successfully put between himself and the Allied armies. Later that day, his forces defeated the Earl of Manchester's dragoons, who had been left to guard a bridge of boats across the Ouse at the village of Poppleton a few miles north of York. This had been the only crossing available to the Allies above another bridge of boats at Acaster Malbis 5 miles south of York, and its capture prevented the Allies crossing the Ouse to engage Rupert. More of Rupert's cavalry arrived at York to gain touch with the garrison. With York definitely relieved, Newcastle sent Rupert a fulsome letter of welcome and congratulations. Rupert replied, not in person but through Goring, with a peremptory demand for Newcastle to march his forces to Rupert's assistance on the following morning.